Unlike my usual content on this channel, this video is going to be closer to a vlog of sorts. It's been 8 long years since I've built the PC I've used until just a few days ago. It's a low-cost machine made on a budget of less than $700, and the only upgrades, if you want to call them that I've given to it since then are just increased storage space and a new case. Beyond that, I've been using the same CPU, GPU, power supply, motherboard, and RAM that I installed all those years ago. And yes, this is the PC I've been using to make content for this channel. It's why the first few videos I made are only in 720p. I was unsure if this old toaster was willing to handle 1080p production and exporting in its aged state until I actually tried. However, I've finally had the opportunity to move on. That's right, I finally upgraded, or rather, built an entirely new machine with a slightly higher budget of about $800. And in this video, I'm going to talk about both machines and my decision-making process in the components I picked for the new one. Before I go over the details, I just want to get some things out of the way. First, I am not a tech guy, and this isn't a tech-dedicated channel. I do not receive any semblance of sponsorship from any computer hardware manufacturer, and I do not work in computer hardware sales or production. I'm just a normal guy, a layman, if you will, who simply does some research and tries to stay as up-to-date on the industry as he reasonably can. Second, don't expect any sort of monster machine rocking dual 2080 Ti's here. Like I said, the most I was willing to spend was a fairly modest $800, something that could get by doing 1080p gaming and video editing. That's all. Now that all that shit's out of the way, let's talk about my old PC, my ancient relic that's been both a pain in my ass and a loyal companion since I built it back in 2012. I'm going to go over it with the help of my Newegg order history. As you may expect, it's an AMD machine, rocking an FX 4100 Zambezi quad-core, which has been extremely reliable since day one, actually. I have no intention of just getting rid of it right now, as it still works perfectly fine. I don't know what I'll do with it, but I know it still has some fire in it yet. The motherboard is an Asus M5A97 with a black and blue color scheme, which my entire rig ended up having without me really trying to go for it. Unfortunately, some of the SATA ports seem to have become unresponsive in the last couple of years. The memory is a G.SKILL Aries made up of two 4GB DDR3 sticks running at 1600 MHz. The video card is a Sapphire Radeon HD 6850 with 1GB of video RAM. It suited me extremely well for the first few years I had it, running new games at the time at 1080p and usually at least mid-level settings and still getting a near constant 60 frames per second. The power supply unit is a Diablotech UL series 775 watt supply, and despite getting it dirt cheap, Diablotech having a sketchy reputation at the time, and the thing not even having any 80+ certification, it's arguably been the most reliable part of this machine, probably because it was never close to reaching the 775 watt limit, but still, it's been putting the work in and hasn't shown even the slightest hiccup since the day I got it. When I first built the computer, I got 2 storage drives with the intent of dedicating one as the boot drive, and my choice for that was an OCZ Vertex SATA SSD with an unfortunately tiny 30GB of space. Look, it was 2012, SSDs were still new and insanely expensive, even the tiny ones, okay? It was $50 at the time, and I thought 30GB would be more than enough just for the operating system, and it kinda was. But as time went on, I found myself getting warnings from my computer that my C drive was almost full, like every week. It took 6.5 years, but eventually the thing just crapped out entirely. It stopped taking any power, no matter which cables I used or which SATA port I plugged it into. I've kept it lying around as a sort of memento, a little souvenir of my first successful PC build. Finally, while this technically isn't a computer component, I also bought a new monitor at the time, which I did not include in the earlier budget of less than $700. It's a 1080p Acer G235HABD, and I'm still using it. I'm looking at it right this second as I produce this video. It's still my main monitor. The power and settings buttons have become a bit wonky over the years, but it otherwise still functions perfectly. In total, including tax and shipping, my first build in 2012 cost me about $670. Overall, I was quite happy with it. It was inexpensive and allowed me to play games I otherwise couldn't. Sadly, it wasn't the most capable machine and took only a few years for me to feel the age of its parts, but it ultimately still lasted just over 8 years, which is drastically longer than any store-bought calculator I had, and if I went back in time to pick components again, I might still pick the same ones. This rig may be heavily outdated now, but as my first ever custom-built personal computer, it'll always have a special place in my heart. After more than 8 years, it was time for an upgrade. A fairly big one. So I decided on a budget, which as I mentioned before was a maximum of $800, and started doing my research. Things were complicated for a while because, as you may already know, there's some frustrating hardware shortages going on, due largely in part to the worldwide pandemic we're all dealing with. From what I could tell, motherboards and power supply units seem especially affected by this, with CPUs and GPUs following. Despite finally having the time and money to build a new PC, circumstances prevented me from getting it done as quickly as I would like, and I was pretty annoyed. Thankfully, I was able to keep an eye on the stock and prices of all of my first choice components, and I was able to secure all of them at almost the exact same time. So Lady Luck was ultimately on my side. And now my new PC is built, and it's what I'm using right this moment to make this video. Just like before, it's an AMD powered machine, this time with a Ryzen 5 3600 CPU. I considered picking a 3300X to save some money, but two things stopped me. One, it was unfortunately one of the CPUs affected by shortages during my research, and two, I decided it was probably better to stick with the processor with more cores and threads if I wanted to do video and image editing. Thus, the 3600 won out. My motherboard of choice is an MSI B450 Tomahawk MAX, because the MAX line of MSI motherboards are compatible with Ryzen 3000 series CPUs out of the box. So I had no risk of needing to update my BIOS as soon as I got it just so I could use it. Plus, it just seemed like the best board for the price. It also has red LEDs pre-installed, which is pretty neat. The memory is once again from G.SKILL, specifically their Ripjaws series, with 2 sticks of 8GB totaling at 16, running at 3200 MHz. The GPU is an 8GB Radeon RX 580 from Gigabyte. Since I still plan on using a 1080p monitor, I figured I wouldn't need to shell out the extra cash for a 4K or even 1440p video card. If I did have about $100 or so more in my budget, I likely would have picked a 5600 XT instead. However, after spending some time with the RX 580, I am very content with it. The power supply unit is a CV550 from Corsair, which has 80+ bronze certification and, well, it's been working great. It's a PSU, so as long as my computer powers on and doesn't fry, it's fantastic. Next is the storage. The Tomahawk MAX supports one M.2 SSD, and I took advantage of that immediately with a Western Digital 500GB SN550. It's the only piece of storage in my new PC at the moment, but I don't expect 500GB to last super long, so I do plan on buying a SATA SSD eventually. At the moment, however, there's still a lot of space left. Finally, the case. My tower of choice is a Phanteks P400A, the version without the RGB fans, which has a mesh front panel, a dust cover for the top vents, and a tempered glass side. It's a beautiful tower with no sharp edges, lots of room for good airflow, and the front panel wiring was already organized and tied up when I got it. Coming in at only around $70, the value this case boasts is pretty high. In total, including tax and shipping, and I should probably mention that I got everything from Newegg except the motherboard, which I got from Best Buy, My entire new build cost me $785. Without shipping, it'd probably be about $20 less, but either way, it came in at under my maximum budget of $800. I also had to order a couple of DisplayPort to DVI cables so I could actually connect my monitors to my PC, but that's just something limited to me, so I won't include that expense. I suppose I probably could have, or maybe even should have, waited for next-gen Ryzen CPUs to come out, but honestly, I was just getting impatient and really wanted a new computer as soon as possible. I've been using this machine for several days now, and I've been very happy with it, especially since I finally took the chance to move from Windows 7 to Windows 10. Yeah, I was one of those people who stubbornly stuck to 7, but I figured a new PC called for a new operating system. When I was finishing building my new computer, I remembered the Phanteks case only comes with 2 fans pre-installed, which likely wouldn't hinder performance by any consequential amount, but I remember that my old case came with 5, including 3 that have blue LEDs, so I took 2 of those and placed one in the front and the other at the top. The resulting aesthetic is, in my opinion, really cool. If you look at the case directly from the front, you can see the red LEDs of the motherboard sort of contorted behind the front fan. It looks pretty neat. Same goes for the view through the tempered glass panel as well. Please excuse the rushed cable management. As you may have noticed, the background footage I've been using for this video has been game footage, namely Nex Machina and Elderborn. And they're shown running on my new computer with some performance information thanks to FPS Monitor. As you can see, neither are exactly jaw-dropping AAA blockbuster games that one would usually test their new machine with. Remember, I'm only working with 500 gigabytes of space here. But Nex Machina is a fast-paced twin-stick shooter that is completely loaded with vibrant, sparkly particle effects. Even with the game at max settings, my computer has almost no issue whatsoever with keeping that frame rate in the triple digits. I actually tried to play Nex Machina on my old computer, and despite the lowest settings I could select, I couldn't even get the game to hit a constant 30 frames per second, let alone 100. As for Elderborn, it's a first-person Souls-like that allows you to set your own target frame rate. For this recording, I set it to 88, which is why it stays around there. However, I later discovered that if I set it high enough, my computer maxes it out at around 120. Again, this is at the highest possible settings. So yeah, I'm pretty happy with my new machine. This entire process has reminded me how much I enjoy building computers, which is something I forgot in the many years since the last time I had done it. I don't make enough money to just do one every set number of months, sadly, but here's hoping I don't wait another 8 years for an upgrade next time. If you're listening to this and have never built your own computer before, and are probably considering doing it, then I'd recommend giving it a shot. It's not as difficult as it may seem. You just have to put a little bit of time researching what kind of components suit your needs, then buying them, and then just putting them all together, which is the most time-consuming part simply because there's just a lot of parts to plug into one another. There are a lot of resources and videos here on YouTube that can simplify the PC building process a significant amount. I think it's a skill worth learning, especially if you just enjoy using computers a lot. But this more or less concludes everything I have to say about building them. I've bid farewell to my old machine and now I'm in the process of welcoming my new one. Now if you'll excuse me, I have more games to test out. Thank you for watching and I'll see you around.